The 18th century dawned with the Ottoman Empire at a crossroads. The once mighty empire, which had dominated vast regions for centuries, now faced a series of unprecedented challenges. The dawn of a new era brought with it both opportunities and threats, and the choices made during this period would determine the future trajectory of the empire. Once a beacon of military might and cultural brilliance, the empire now faced an uncertain future. The grandeur of its past was evident in its majestic palaces and rich cultural heritage, but these symbols of glory were now overshadowed by the looming spectre of decline. The empire's military, once the envy of the world, was no longer invincible, and its cultural achievements, though still impressive, could not shield it from the winds of change. Its vast territories, stretching from the Balkans to the Middle East, felt the tremors of change. The diverse regions under Ottoman control were experiencing their own unique challenges, from local uprisings to external threats. The empire's ability to maintain cohesion and control over such a sprawling domain was increasingly in question. New powers were rising in Europe, their ambitions fueled by Enlightenment ideals and burgeoning industrial strength. The intellectual and technological advancements of the Enlightenment were transforming European societies, leading to increased economic and military power. These rising European nations were eager to expand their influence and saw the weakening Ottoman Empire as an opportunity to assert their dominance. The Ottoman Empire, once the master of its own destiny, now found itself struggling to keep pace. The internal dynamics of the empire were fraught with challenges, from political infighting to economic difficulties. The once unified leadership was now fragmented, and the empire's ability to respond effectively to external threats was compromised. The empire's internal strength was waning. The infrastructure that had once supported a thriving civilization was now in disrepair. Palaces and public buildings, once symbols of Ottoman grandeur, were falling into neglect. This physical decay mirrored the internal decay of the empire's institutions and governance. Corruption had seeped into the arteries of power. The once efficient administrative system was now plagued by bribery and nepotism. Officials who were more interested in personal gain than the welfare of the state weakened the empire from within. This corruption eroded public trust and made it difficult to implement necessary reform. The once feared Janissary Corps, the backbone of the Ottoman army, had grown complacent and resistant to change. Originally an elite fighting force, the Janissaries had become a powerful political entity, more interested in preserving their privileges than in military excellence. Their resistance to modernization efforts further weakened the empire's military capabilities. Their military prowess, once unmatched, had dwindled amidst a culture of privilege and entitlement. The Janissaries' focus on maintaining their status and benefits led to a decline in discipline and effectiveness. This decline was evident in the empire's military defeats and the loss of territories that had once been firmly under Ottoman control. The empire's economic foundations were also showing signs of strain. The traditional trade routes that had brought wealth and prosperity were now under threat from European competition. The rise of new trade networks and the increasing dominance of European merchants undermined the Ottoman economy, leading to financial difficulties and a decline in state revenues. Trade routes that once brought immense wealth were now threatened by European rivals. The competition for control of these lucrative routes intensified, and the Ottomans found themselves at a disadvantage. European advancements in navigation and shipbuilding allowed them to dominate global trade, further eroding the economic base of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire needed a leader who could not only recognize these challenges but also possess the vision and fortitude to confront them head-on. The situation called for a ruler who could navigate the complex political landscape, implement necessary reforms, and restore the empire's strength and stability. In 1774, that leader emerged in the form of Sultan Abdul Hamid I. His ascension to the throne marked a turning point for the empire. Abdul Hamid I was acutely aware of the challenges facing the Ottoman state and was determined to address them with a series of bold initiatives. Ascending to the throne during a time of profound turmoil, Abdul Hamid I understood that the survival of the empire depended on its ability to adapt and modernize. He recognized that the old ways were no longer sufficient and that significant changes were needed to revitalize the state. His reign, though brief, would be marked by efforts to reform the military, administration and economy. His reign, though brief, would be marked by a series of ambitious reforms aimed at revitalizing the Ottoman state and reclaiming its place as a major power. Abdul Hamid I's efforts laid the groundwork for future leaders to continue the process of modernization and reform, setting the stage for the eventual resurgence of the Ottoman Empire. Abdul Hamid was not a man cut from the traditional cloth of Ottoman sultans. Unlike many of his predecessors, who were often more focused on maintaining the status quo, Abdul Hamid I was a visionary. He saw the world changing rapidly around him and knew that the Ottoman Empire could not afford to remain stagnant. He was a scholar, a keen observer of the world beyond the empire's borders. His education and intellectual curiosity set him apart. He spent countless hours studying ancient texts and contemporary works, always seeking to understand the broader currents of history and politics. He recognized the growing power of European nations and understood the need for the Ottoman Empire to modernize its institutions, its military, and its very outlook if it were to survive. The rise of European powers was not just a distant phenomenon, it was a direct challenge to the Ottoman way of life. He was not afraid to challenge the status quo, even if it meant clashing with deeply entrenched interests within the empire itself. His court was often a battleground of ideas, with traditionalists and reformers vying for influence. Abdul Hamid knew that real change would require not just new policies, but a new mindset. His reign began with a focus on stabilizing the empire's finances. He understood that without a strong economic foundation, no other reforms would be possible. He implemented measures to curb corruption and streamline tax collection. These efforts were not always popular, but they were necessary. By reducing the inefficiencies and graft that plagued the empire's finances, he aimed to create a more sustainable economic model. He understood that a sound economy was the bedrock upon which any successful reform program must be built. Trade and commerce flourished under his watch, as he sought to integrate the Ottoman economy more closely with those of Europe and Asia. He also recognized the importance of education and knowledge. He believed that an educated populace was essential for the empire's future. He established new schools and libraries, encouraging the study of science, mathematics, and European languages. These institutions became centers of learning and innovation, helping to cultivate a new generation of Ottoman thinkers and leaders. He believed that the Ottoman Empire could learn from the West without abandoning its own unique identity and traditions. This cultural exchange enriched Ottoman society, bringing new ideas and perspectives while preserving the empire's rich heritage. Abdul Hamid I's most ambitious reforms, however, were directed at the Ottoman military. He knew that a strong modern military was crucial for the empire's survival. He understood that the empire's survival depended on its ability to defend itself against external threats. The military had to be capable of meeting the challenges posed by increasingly powerful European armies. The Janissary Corps, once the pride of the Ottoman army, had become a shadow of its former self. Their resistance to modernization was a significant hurdle. Their resistance to change and their growing political influence posed a significant obstacle to the Sultan's plans for modernization. Abdul Hamid's efforts to reform the military were met with fierce opposition, but he remained steadfast in his vision for a stronger, more resilient Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, by the time Abdul Hamid took the throne, was a vast and complex entity, sprawling across 3 continents and encompassing a diverse array of cultures, languages, and religions. This diversity, while a source of strength, also posed significant administrative challenges. The central government in Istanbul struggled to maintain control over distant provinces, each with its own local power structures and interests. Internally, the empire was facing a multitude of challenges. Corruption was rampant, weakening the state's ability to govern effectively and eroding public trust. Local officials often acted with impunity, prioritizing their own enrichment over the needs of the people. This led to widespread discontent and unrest among the populace, who felt increasingly alienated from their rulers. The Janissaries, once the elite military corps and protectors of the realm, had become more interested in maintaining their own power and privileges than in serving the empire. Their influence extended beyond the battlefield as they meddled in politics, and resisted any attempts at reform that threatened their status. This internal power struggle further weakened the central authority. Externally, the empire faced pressure from ambitious European powers eager to exploit any signs of weakness. The balance of power in Europe was shifting, and the Ottoman Empire found itself increasingly outmatched by the military and economic might of its rivals. Russia, in particular, under the ambitious Catherine the Great, posed a constant threat, eyeing the empire's territories in the Balkans and the Black Sea. Russian expansionist policies were driven by a desire to gain access to warm water ports and to extend their influence in Eastern Europe, often at the expense of the Ottoman Empire. The once mighty Ottoman army, slow to adapt to new military technologies and tactics, suffered a string of defeats that further emboldened its enemies and exposed the empire's vulnerability. The military's reliance on outdated methods and equipment made it difficult to compete with the more advanced European armies, leading to a series of humiliating losses. The Ottoman economy, too, was struggling to keep pace with the changing times. Traditional industries were in decline, and the empire's economic policies failed to stimulate growth or innovation. The lack of investment in infrastructure and education further hampered economic development. European powers, fueled by the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, were flooding Ottoman markets with cheaper manufactured goods, undermining local industries and artisans. The influx of these goods created a trade imbalance that drained the empire's resources and made it increasingly dependent on foreign imports. The empire's traditional reliance on agriculture and raw material exports left it vulnerable to fluctuations in global markets and increasingly dependent on its European rivals. The agricultural sector, while still a significant part of the economy, could not generate the wealth needed to sustain the empire's ambitions. These challenges, both internal and external, created a perfect storm that threatened to engulf the empire. The combination of political corruption, military decline, economic stagnation, and external pressure made it increasingly difficult for the Ottoman state to maintain its cohesion and stability. Abdul Hamid I, acutely aware of the precarious situation he inherited, knew that bold and decisive action was needed to steer the Ottoman state away from the path of decline. His reign was marked by efforts to address these multifaceted challenges through a series of reforms aimed at strengthening the central government, modernizing the military, and revitalizing the economy. His reforms, therefore, were not merely about modernization, they were about survival. Abdul Hamid I's vision was to create a more resilient and adaptable empire, capable of withstanding both internal dissent and external threats. His legacy would be defined by his attempts to navigate the empire through one of the most turbulent periods in its history.